Hello. Hi, guys. Hello, all. I think I got my camera on. There, I got my camera on. I'm here at a public library in Kansas City right now. Let me tilt this to me. I was kind of concerned. I couldn't see myself. In the public library, you have to turn on the camera physically up here. I apologize for being late to do that. My name is Kevin Stoda, and I want to welcome you to the Kevin Stoda channel. Here I'm going to um, go ahead and tell one of my favorite stories. I'm practicing telling stories for the Mid-Continent Library's Story Center. Um, I'll start with one about my daughter, and then I'll tell you one about traveling, and I'll decide what to tell you later. But anyway, I'm practicing my storytelling. Let me take a snack. Mm, mm, Scooby snack. Well, my daughter's here in the library. She's attending an anime program, and it takes about an hour and a half, and I'm waiting for her to finish. So I thought I would share with you in the meantime what I'm up to in terms of story center, telling stories. I've told this story about my daughter's name, Kenzenia, several times recently, and each time people seem to be impressed with it. So I'll start out with that story. Um, you see, I had decided early in life to be a traveler and to live and work in other countries. Uh, I was inspired, first of all, by my dad, who at the age of 21, as he said, instead of going to college, um, had saved up while working at a lawnmower factory in Genoa, Illinois, his hometown, uh, earning money. He saved up enough money to be able to take a trip around the world. It was the late 1950s, and of course, he had to room with somebody on the trip. But the plane traveled to over 2 dozen countries, and my dad was able to see places like Japan and Egypt, India, Spain, Germany, etc. And it cost him only about $2,500 to pay for that trip. And that was during the 1950s when the dollar was so strong. It was also a trip that was particularly low budget because it was for Catholics, and many of them were seeing this as part of their religious training, further education, including about a half dozen priests who were on board the plane. Uh, so that's how my dad traveled around the world. So that was in the late 50s. And in the late 60s, I began to see his slides. He began to show us slides about this trip, explaining what he'd done going around the world. And then in the 70s, early 70s, I had a good fortune in Wentzville, Missouri, where we had moved to when I was about 8 or 9 years old. In Wentzville, I had first and fifth grade an African studies teacher as well as American history teacher. This woman had traveled 3 times to Africa already, and she had a lot to share in terms of personal experience that made it lively for me. Likewise, in sixth grade, we studied Latin American culture and history, and that was taught by a woman from Brazil, Miss Gilani. As you can see, then my education was already leading me to want to be interested in going to these places because my dad had, and because these people I knew as a young person had gone to these places, different places around the world. But I wanted to do it differently. I wanted to live abroad, whereas my dad had just traveled abroad, or he had worked abroad for just, a few months at a time. For example, he'd gone to Venezuela, and he'd also gone to Papua New Guinea to work with telephone exchanges where he was installing equipment. I began then my travels and my studies, and for a good 2.5 decades, I was pretty much by myself. But in 2008, at the end of 2008, I got married, and that was in Kuwait, and my wife was Filipina. And I proposed to her like this. I said, would you like to start a new life with me in Germany? Because I had just gotten an offer to teach in Germany. I've been teaching in Kuwait by that time a good 5.5 years. I was ready to move on. And this would be the second time I taught in Germany. I taught in the late 1980s. That's why it was for me a return trip. And I thought, well, that's a good place to raise a family because of the quality of benefits that people get when they live and work in Germany. Anything from transportation to a well-planned housing, etc., for relatively inexpensive prices, in my experience. So in 2009, I moved to Germany with the expectations that my wife would join me. I worked that way teaching English for the next 5-6 months. By that time, it had become clear to me it wasn't going to be so easy to get my wife over. She wasn't getting the visa. It was just taking on and on. I thought it would be finished by April, and I told my wife to go ahead and quit her job in Kuwait. And by her quitting her job, and per my request, she had to return to the Philippines no later than by July of that year, 2009. So we went to then as a couple back to the Philippines with her. I left just for a few weeks to go, and we went on a honeymoon in northern part of Philippines, and then when I went to Palawan with her and visited her family eventually in the islands of Negros. After saying goodbye, I returned at the end of August of 2009 to Germany to continue my work and hoping that my wife would be able to get her visa. But as soon as I got back, my boss told me he was liquidating the company by the end of the year. Now it was clear to me why it was so hard to get my wife a visa. Evidently, the government of Germany had known what was going on, or was aware tax-wise what was happening to the company and the instability thereof. And that was probably the reason my wife never got the visa, even though she was this close to getting it many times that year. And then the following week, in early September, my wife emailed me a message and says, Kevin, I'm pregnant. She'd been playing basketball with some friends, and a woman a little older than her recognized that she was holding herself differently and said she's pregnant. And sure enough, she visited a doctor and verified this in early September of 2009. My daughter would be born in the Philippines in May of 2010. I do want to say in the meantime, of course, I visited my wife at least one more time while I was trying to find a job in Germany that was more permanent. And we discussed my child's name. We didn't know if it was going to be a boy or a girl because neither of us believed it was necessary to know in advance whether it was a boy or girl. And so Vic, my wife, told the doctor she wasn't interested in knowing the gender of the baby. So we had planned for 2 different names. We kind of wanted to have that Middle Eastern touch, and we talked about Cleo and Clea. That would be Khlea or Khlia or Khlio, something like that, so that my a child would have a very special name, a very unique name. Um, and we were pretty firm about that. When I, however, when it came to April, just 1 month before my child was to be born, in the middle of May, uh, my wife had indicated maybe we should choose the name related to the second daughter of the prophet Job. I'm saying prophet because that's what Arabs would call him. Job is a book in the Bible, and Job is the main character in the story besides God. And Job, at the end of the story, gives his inheritance to his children equally. Even the daughters get an equal inheritance. So Job sets a special position for women that other people at the time didn't do for their daughters. They would mostly give it to the older boys, the property, and the women wouldn't have any way of earning from it. So I was looking at that last chapter of Job, and I said, well, it sounds good. And I wasn't quite sure if we had made a decision or not. As I said, I was looking for a job in Germany, but by the end of April, I'd pretty well given up. So I began to look for other work. For example, I had an interview with Saudi Aramco. Aramco is the oil company in Saudi Arabia. And of course, that was good paying money. And I flew up to London to do an interview for this position. I actually did get the offer, but my wife didn't want to go to Saudi Arabia. So I turned it down eventually. But as I was at the interview, I'd finished with the interview, I received a text on my phone. Back then, of course, we didn't have smartphones. I mean, I didn't have a smartphone in 2009, 2010. Other people did, but I was just using a flip phone. And in it, my wife said, "You win. It's a girl." I've been saying, of course, that my baby would be a girl the whole time. And it said, "It's a girl, and what do we name her?" I was surprised. I figured a name had already been given, but I was overjoyed to hear this news. And not having on a smartphone, that means I couldn't look up the Bible really quickly in the Bible to find out how to spell the second daughter's name. The name is something like Kezia or Cassia, and it starts with a K, but it doesn't have as many letters as my daughter's name. I had simply tried to think, okay, how can I indicate that they should look it up and still give my opinion? I decided against Clea and decided for Kezia. So I spelled Kezia intentionally with a couple ands and an extra letter in order to force them to think about it and to look up what the real spelling for Kezia was. However, when I arrived in the Philippines about a week later, and I saw my baby for the first time, I learned her name was Kenzania with two N's, as I put it in. And my wife explained that both she and the doctor thought that was a beautiful name. So my daughter's name is Kenzenia, Kenzenia, which is pretty interesting because my wife is from Negros, and Kenya in Africa means black, and the neighboring country is Tanzania. So Tanzania sounds like that location, not very far from Oman, just across a strait and into Africa from Salalah, Oman, where we were going to eventually live. Then I want to also add that when we eventually went back to the Middle East, to Salalah, Oman, that's the town, one of the three towns in the Middle East that claim the birthplace of Job. So we got to visit the tomb of Job, and as I said, able to make that connection to for my daughter. And even as a little girl, we jokingly said, we're going to go to your grandpa's tomb to visit, as the many people from either of the Abrahamic faiths, like Islam or Christianity, or even Jews who believe that was a location, might go as a kind of a pilgrimage. So that's how my daughter became Kenzania. And like I said, there was a connection to Job that we soon were experiencing when we moved to the Middle East. Thank you for listening to that story. You can ask me any questions if you'd like. Let me see. I need to check up and see if there's any messages. I think I'm going to end the stream for right now, and I'll tell you another story in a minute. Okay. I do hope you remember this is the Kevin Stoda channel, and that you can like this channel and you can subscribe to the members. And let's wrap it up.